Welcome everybody to our Walk in My Shoes series of short webinars designed to spark thoughtful debate and highlight industry trends in philanthropy and social impact investing. Today we'll be exploring the relationship between local philanthropy and community work. My name is Sophia Sahanik and I am the Director of Membership and Development and your moderator for this series. As a not-for-profit membership organisation, Philanthropy Impact exists with the mission to increase and improve philanthropy and social investment, and to also encourage impact investing. If you have any questions about what we do, the training we offer and how we can collaborate, please get in touch with me directly in the chat today. As this is a strictly 30-minute session, we are strict, but we are taking questions. We ask that you use the chat function to introduce yourself, have your say, and also pose your questions to our panel. Please make sure to add panellists and all attendees if you'd like to interact on the chat and remain respectful to all throughout. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our chair for this session, Rosemary Mcdonald, who is the CEO of the UK Community Foundations. And joining Rosemary, we welcome Elizabeth Howe, who is Chair of the Heart of Bucks, Tom Latchford, Chair of Local Giving Foundation, and Victoria Papworth, Director at Coutts Institute. Thank you all for your time and insight today, and I will now hand over to Rosemary to make a start. Thank you, Rosemary.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. This afternoon's session is about the importance of local organisations and why many philanthropists support their local communities. We're also going to have a look at some of the key challenges and issues for philanthropy and social investors in that area. And we're going to talk through some of the innovative options for philanthropists and other local funders. So I just want to kick off with a question about Danny Kruger's report, Levelling Up Our Communities, a proposal for a new social covenant. Now that document sets up a vision for a more local, less bureaucratic and centralised society. So my first question is, what do you think he means by an emphasis on localism, and how could de-emphasising centralised systems be achieved? Elizabeth, may I send this one to you first?
Yes, thank you. Certainly with localism, to my mind, it's about empowering local people to make a difference, to make a change to their society. And in trying to do this, it's not because there's a withdrawal of government funding, it's because it actually opens up the opportunities, it opens up the discussions and paves a way for communities to achieve that social change, to be a catalyst for social change. And certainly at Heart of Bucks, we've had a wonderful case with the local libraries where the local government has had to cease using their facilities for a local library, and a community group has set up its own function with its own books supplied by members of the community. And this has drawn the community together. They have actually felt empowered. It's given volunteers an opportunity to give their time. And it's much more now than just a community library. It is a community hub. And I think that's the essence of the localism. It's enabling people to take control of things where they can make a change.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Tom, how do you see localism reflected in your area of work?
Well, the role of local giving kind of started with a problem that was encountered by our founder, Marcel Speller, who basically wanted to engage and give to local communities, but found it was kind of very difficult to sort of find out which ones to give to and to give large grants across a wide range of local organisations and actually provide that on the ground support. So what our platform does is we try to do two things. One is to work with big funders to be able to distribute large amounts of money, like our founder Marcel did, and now we work with DCMS and the government. We work with funders like People's Postcode Lottery, who we're also distributing £1 million for this year. And then what we're trying to do is then work with the local people who want to support but don't necessarily know which organisations are reliable and which ones are the best ones to do, or have an incentive to give now. And then we look to leverage that money with match fund initiatives so that we basically double the money from large funders and unite with the local aspect. So what we found is that actually getting that kind of draws the attention to local charities that do incredible things and to have incredibly high leverage that allows both the local people to support and for big funders to support in an easier way.
Thanks, Tom. And Vicky, are you finding that your donors are interested in local solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. So the donors that we work with at Coutts will want to give locally often, whether that's locally to projects and organisations in the UK or locally to organisations that are working globally or in other countries across the world. And often we find that the best way for them to do that is through locally trusted partners. And in the UK, often those are community foundations. And speaking to Tom's points about match funding, this is where I think I would have really liked to see in Danny Kruger's report something that worked perhaps a little bit more with the grain of philanthropic behaviour. He spoke very comprehensively, very convincingly, and it's fantastic to see such a vocal policy space. But it would have been great to see perhaps some more government-supported match funding programmes, or perhaps special giving zones, speaking to Elizabeth's point around the power of local activity. That way, I think there's the kind of the policy carrot along with the stick.
Thank you. And what do you think are some of the key challenges for philanthropists and social investors supporting community-based organisations and smaller charities, Vicky?
Often the challenge, I think, is managing to reach out to a broad and diverse range of organisations who are working in this space, who are reactive and credible and able to act responsively in a fast-paced environment. Local organisations are so well placed to effectively identify and target the needs of specific communities. And often that means working with partners who can help identify those organisations who are working, at the front line, who are able to work really, really credibly, who are able to respond quickly to new and emerging situations.
That's really interesting. There's a comment in the chat from Adrian Barrett from Sussex Community Foundation, and he says, interesting to see Baroness Barron says recently, it's hard in government to hold your nerve and trust the local. Elizabeth, should they trust the local?
Undoubtedly. We actually have a very, very robust system of firstly assessing the need, because we have outreach workers who can go out into the community and we can get first-hand information about assessing the need. But then secondly, we can do the due diligence on the organisations that are delivering the outcomes and ensure ourselves that they are robust and sustainable in order to give the greatest impact. So undoubtedly, local is the way to identify where need can be best addressed.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. But Tom, how do you think we could decentralise some of these central systems to give local communities more power? How could we do that?
Yeah, I think decentralisation is a really interesting word and frame to use in the world right now, because obviously we're going through a massive trend over even the last year in the rise of cryptocurrencies and decentralised platforms, just seeing that becoming a term that people are really rallying behind and getting behind. And I think for me, there's two aspects to look at with decentralisation. One is that people, the charity is becoming less important. It's people see a local problem that they want solving, and actually they kind of, they want that problem solved. They don't necessarily want to support the charity to solve it. It's just that's what the charity does. So I think like that's one interesting lens. And what we're trying to do there is actually break down the barriers to organizations being able to even start locally out of a form of people, a community trying to solve a problem. And this has exploded in the last year. So we've had sort of people forming WhatsApp groups, trying to respond to COVID, and then forming a community, not wanting to build the infrastructure of an organization. And that's where we've kind of stepped in and supported them to have a bank account, to do due diligence so that people can trust them. But we're seeing a massive rise of this. In the last year, there was a network that we found on WhatsApp of 4 million people wanting to support local groups, but forming their own kind of WhatsApp groups to actually solve this. So I think that's kind of one problem, which is actually, it's about the problem, it's not about the organization anymore. And there's that layer of transparency. The other problem with decentralization is that the big funding doesn't get to the local grassroots organizations, because actually for big funders, it's really hard to have thousands of applications from people asking for $5,000. And so that's the other angle that we try to step into and say, look, actually, it's all about leverage here, and it's about coming together and working together. And we'll take something like we did last year. We took £1 million of the government and distributed it for COVID by saying it's we're going to be decentralized in the way that we work, because basically you can get up to £1 million for your local charity from this pile, and it's just matched £1 for £1 until all of that money runs out. And the reason that's kind of democratized is that it's the people's vote. People vote with their money, and then it's matched, and then the government will know that their money is going to places and the right places, and we were helping facilitate with that. But I think that's kind of the interesting issues, is centralized funding and how to decentralize that, and then actually this grassroots decentralization effect from the ground up, where people want to focus on the problems that need solving with the minimal amount of infrastructure costs to support.
Yeah, great. And Vicky, are you finding that your donors are more moved by the cause itself, or by individual charities when you're advising them?
I mean, it really depends, of course, and every donor's journey is really different. But actually, whenever we start our conversations with our clients, it often starts with the cause that's closest to their heart. And I think it's really fulfilling and rewarding to move along with a donor on that journey, and to help them understand and work around those causes which are important to them, and help them to take sometimes a more strategic view. And obviously all of our donors' journeys are different, and some people want to work very, very closely with the organisations with which they support. Others, as they move along that path, decide they want to take a wider route, perhaps working with other partners on a local or a regional or a national scale. And increasingly, actually, and this is rather interesting, we're seeing donors using the Sustainable Development Goals as part of their strategic framework for giving. And I think it helps, especially, you know, as I said before, our clients who want to give locally, but internationally, it helps, as this is the same, you know, in the UK, as if they were giving elsewhere in the world. Understanding the importance of local infrastructure, which allows you to reach those local organisations, and having a strategic framework with which to make the change happen, feels like it's incredibly rewarding for our donors. Brilliant.
And Elizabeth, are you using Sustainable Development Goals in Bucks?
I am. I was just going to put my hand up and say that. In fact, one of the initiatives that we've done recently is to set up a Green Futures Fund. And this actually is giving schools and local communities the opportunity to work together on environmental issues. It's had a collaboration between the public sector and private donors adding to this pot. But I think the power of it is that it has enabled people through very small levels of giving to actually feel invested in global issues. And I think there's a great power between a local initiative actually having a bigger impact.
Yes, and I think it's great that local organisations can link themselves to the Sustainable Development Goals, because it just tells such a great story, as you were saying. There's another interesting comment in the chat, Tom, about a key challenge for smaller community-based organisations is to know about funders. How does local giving and other online platforms, how do they broaden the scope of potential funders for community groups?
One of the ways that we do it is we do big deals with already big funders, where they don't necessarily again, they're not looking to fund a specific organisation. They're looking to solve problems and fund cause areas. So just to give a kind of recent examples of campaigns, I talked about the £1 million we distributed for COVID relief in the government last year. That was, we basically said, here's £1 million, you can get access to it based on a membership, and then that pot went within 48 hours of the fund opening. So in that way, the government's not sort of attached to which organisation gets funding, it's attached to doing big grants. We're doing the same with People's Postcode Lottery, where actually they're trying to get distribution into different areas. And so on the one level, we do deals with organisations willing to give us 7-figure funding that we can then go and find the local organisations to match. That actually allows the organisations to have a tool, a bit like the e-commerce world works on Black Friday deals and stuff like that, where there's very little of that stuff for us as fundraisers in the sector to actually say, we need your money today, we need to go and kind of close this deal, otherwise you miss out. And so actually what a lot of organizations did was set up calling campaigns on the fact that their donations could be doubled. And we had many larger funders come in that had never supported those organizations before and giving £5,000, £10,000 gifts on the back of knowing that it would be doubled. Because I think some funders are also interested in leverage, and how do I bring leverage to that equation? So yeah, that's kind of how we do it, which is to unite funders that aren't specifically looking for your organization to fund, but are funding broad impact areas together with local funders that may be able to come out the woodwork based on being able to have a product like a Black Friday deal to be able to sell them.
Brilliant. And I think one of the big changes that we've seen over the pandemic is the amount of unrestricted funding that's been distributed. Elizabeth, how's that been for your groups, just being able to just apply for unrestricted funding and not have to produce a new package for their existing product in order to get it funded again?
I think it's been interesting with the unrestricted funds in that the net emergencies funding that came from the government has been very specifically restricted to COVID-related activity. So whilst it has a wide reach in terms of which areas it can be applied to, it was actually quite tight in terms of it had to be groups that had been specifically impacted by COVID. On a wider basis, we have tried very hard to work with our donors to actually give us unrestricted funding. And it is about developing trust. It's about developing that relationship with the donor where they believe that the community foundation can actually make the best decisions for the greatest outcomes according to their own experience. They have the advisors, they have the staff on board who have the experience. So unrestricted funds actually is the way that we would ask donors to give to us, because we can then target the funding with the greatest impact.
Brilliant. And Vicky, how do you find unrestricted? No, I want you to come in on this, because how do you find that holy grail of getting unrestricted funding?
Yeah, and it's really interesting to speak to Elizabeth's point. I've had many conversations with family charitable trusts who sit with Coutts, who have really opened up their grant making and their donations in a totally different way during COVID. Those families and those individuals that we've been having conversations with over a period of time to talk about the value of unrestricted donations, and to see COVID has really made it quite evident, you know, the value of this and the pressure that we need to put upon ourselves to change and adapt our grant making to make sure that we can invest in infrastructure for it to be here for the long term. And I think there's a really interesting intersection between philanthropy and philanthropists and that hyper-local activity, which is incredibly responsive. It's free from the policy and budget shifts of a central decision maker. It allows us to be responsive and nimble and quick to react in a time of great pace and change. And I think this is where the ever-changing nature of the landscape, where new and emerging groups come along and activate themselves to address new and different problems, we as funders, we as grant makers must challenge ourselves to always be aware of those groups and to be using new ways and possibilities of reaching out to them. I think it has been easy in the past for us to fund those groups that we're most familiar with. And I think Tom and Elizabeth raised some very interesting points around how we can challenge ourselves to be much better at reaching out to new ways of giving. And I would say, as not a solution, but as a suggestion for this, in family office at Coutts, we have a suite of specialists who work around our clients and around our families to help give them all of the expert advice and supports that they need. And it's not just the suite of specialists within family office, but it's those partners and collaborators outside family office that we're aware of, like Tom, like the Community Foundation Network, to help us make sure we can offer the greatest range of support to our clients. And I think that's a challenge to all of us, to make sure that we are working together in a nimble way, in the same way that we would challenge our grantees to work nimbly and responsibly. We need to challenge ourselves to work proactively and collaboratively in the same way.
Brilliant. And another thing that's become very apparent during the pandemic is that the lack of infrastructure support for charities. You know, we've really noticed the Council for Voluntary Services, they're not around in lots of parts of the country because their funding had been cut by local government, and so that infrastructure support wasn't there. And I think that the emergency is very much shone a light on that, and the fact that it is needed and somebody has to play that role. So I think that I'm hoping that we will end up with some emerging infrastructure funding going forward as well. So Tom, I'd ask you to put that on your list, because it may not be the easiest of sells to sell something that's helping other people get better, but other charities get better. But I think it's vitally needed in these times. Yeah. So can we just talk a little bit of, sorry, Elizabeth.
I was just going to interject and say we actually launched a stabilisation fund at Heart of Bucks in order to address those needs of the charities who weren't immediately obviously impacted by COVID, but actually their fundraising abilities have completely disappeared from their usual activities. And so we launched this stabilisation fund, which they could apply for in order to try to even just cover their core costs.
And Tom, are you seeing more people coming onto your site with, you know, looking for recovery costs and things like that to support their organisations rather than project-based costs?
Yeah, I think sort of the funding that we raise from individuals through the platform is only ever unrestricted. So typically we will get match funding from a funder where that funding needs to be restricted and has terms and conditions, but then it's completely unrestricted when it's matched from the public. Something that's been amazing in COVID times has actually seen, we've had donations over quadruple from in the platform from last year to the last 12 months. And the level of donations and tens of millions of pounds flooding in from the public is quite astonishing. And I've been reflecting on it and realizing that it's actually not just that the public has become more conscious of the charity sector and suffering and supporting local communities. It's also that our community groups, because they're having other funding problems, are asking more and creating more innovation in the way that they're asking. And so actually we've seen a 4x increase in donations as a result. And I think that's continuing now, because there's been an upskilling and a deliberate upskilling in the community organizations and community foundations that have been using our platform. And so I think that's kind of a really encouraging sign, which is actually by taking a proactive stance, you will find people that care about your cause in the community. We just need to reach out to them and give them the incentives to give.
And I think they should ask, you know, it is the role of the local charity sector to be as challenging to us and to our funders and our clients as much as it is to be challenging to the role of the state. When we talk with our clients about the power of philanthropy, we talk about the service role that it can offer, that it can do what the state can't or won't do, and at the same time holding the state accountable for those gaps. And many of our clients find it, you know, an incredibly rewarding experience, not only to be funding local activity or infrastructure, to be funding the opportunity to give organisations who are based at the most local level the chance to have their voices heard.
Sorry, there's a dog wandering around in the background. Sorry about you get all sorts of things on Zoom, don't you? So what kind of advice do you think we could give professional advisors to help them support their clients in their clients' wish to give locally? Elizabeth, what sort of advice would you give to professional advisors or to your team? Or
I would say definitely to reach out to your community foundation, to get in touch with the chief executive, to hear about the opportunities and the help that community foundations can give. Secondly, I think that professional advisors need the reassurance that the charities which the community foundation are working with have had the due diligence done on them, that they are sustainable, that the donor is not going to be financing huge salaries or having to accommodate other large costs. There's a much smaller sort of marketing kind of arrangement within the community foundations. And the fact that community foundations have done the research, they understand the need. We have a publication called Bucks Uncovered, which is the equivalent of Vital Signs, which is also produced by community foundations. And it has drilled down into the need in the county, so that actually if a philanthropist is going to make the most difference to his community and be a catalyst for change, he will have the information and the data in order to make those decisions.
Thanks. Tom, can I hand this one to you? What advice would you give to professional advisors or to people who are working with communities in order to help high net worth people give to their local communities?
I think that one thing that we always have to remember is that we're human beings, and the emotion of giving and creating the urgency of the need, communicating in terms of that person's values, and allowing them to see how it enhances their own life's purpose and life's legacy by supporting the local community and economy. And I think it's often easy to jump to the intellectualization of things or the rationale and forget the emotion that still drives giving in most human behavior. So I think like that communication piece before anything else is key.
Thank you. And now, Vicky, what would you tell us? Tell us your secrets.
Well, I would say, you know, we speak a lot about the infrastructure that supports local giving and supports our clients, but as professional advisors, we have strong and shared relationships, often across shared clients ourselves, you know, as being part of that infrastructure which supports that local grant making. And I feel like I need to declare an interest here, having spent many happy years working with the Community Foundation Network, but knowing that we do have that shared approach, that shared connection and touch points with clients, I think allows us to behave in a much more sophisticated way than if we were all working separately.
Brilliant.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, Vicky, Tom, Rosemary, that was really terrific. Thank you. Final words of wisdom, 30 seconds from each of you. I'll start with Elizabeth.
Yes, I think find the passions of your donors so that they can feel that they can really make a difference to their local community.
Thank you. Tom.
What we're always looking for is win-win-win. So how can each party get leverage? And that's kind of why we came across match funding as a way of doing that, because everyone achieves leverage and kind of more incentive to give. So I think, yeah, look where you actually, by adding people together, you achieve a multiplication effect instead of an addition.
Thank you. Vicky.
Just to say, we should all of us just enjoy that confidence and support that we have with our clients to prompt that debate and introspection, so that not only can we work with them and travel with them on their journey, but we can craft a shared language of philanthropy, which is a focus for shifting the dial on social change.
Great. That's quite disciplined, all of you. 30 seconds each. That's terrific. That doesn't happen very often. Rosemary, thank you for chairing this. And the final words of wisdom come from you.
I think you can't be philanthropic unless you're philanthropic yourself. You can't be a philanthropy organisation unless you're philanthropic yourself. And I think it's really important that we remember that this is supposed to be fun and it's a partnership and we all need to get some joy out of it. So, you know, it's great for the donor to give, it's great for the groups to receive, and it's even better if it's unrestricted funding.
Terrific. Thank you. Sofia, over to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks everybody. That was really interesting. We will be back next week for our Walk in My Shoes, and we also have I just want to highlight, we have a really interesting event coming up on the 25th, I think is the right date, on effective philanthropy with Rockefeller advisors, philanthropy advisors in the US. So I'm really interested for that one. I thought it might be a really nice one to highlight to everyone on the audience today. All right, thank you very much, everybody. Have a lovely week, and I will see you next week. Bye.
Yeah, thank you.